people wander down.
It was
I know, a long service today. We'll excuse that. Please pray with me. A good God, the fact that you became one of us, together with the glory of the life you lived, reveal to us that you want to be with us, you want us to be together with each other, you want us to live lives that reflect the justice, truth, and beauty that you are, because this is just who you are. You want us to love our families, our friends, our neighbors, our enemies, the whole world, all of your creation, and you as you love us. With you living with us, by our side, in us, and above us, with you going before us, bidding us sweetly to follow, we can do this. For after all, you did it, and you are not just above us, but also one of us. And for that we give you praise and thanks everlasting, for which you alone are worthy. Amen. Okay, so today we're going to talk about Wednesday and Thursday of Holy Week. So Thursday you know, I'm willing to bet you have been at least once, if not many, many times, to a Maundy Thursday service. So that's when Jesus celebrates the Last Supper, right? This actually gets us through Lent, because Lent is technically done Thursday. And Good Friday, Saturday, and Sunday are like the Passion, even though personally I think we should include them, or the Passion Week should be the whole last week, but I didn't get to decide that 1,500 years ago when they set that up, right? Well, by the way, real quick, we don't have class next week because I won't be here, so you're welcome to do whatever you want.
Palm Sunday, right?
Well, we'll have one on Palm. We'll have class on Palm Sunday. Oh, is there a breakfast? Well, then we'll have to not do it. I wasn't aware of that. So, yep.
You might want to mention too about this possible the switch or whatever.
Yes, and that's the other. Yeah.
We ran long last week and didn't get to it.
So well, there was a sign-up sheet last week, but
I forgot.
But that's okay. A few people did sign up, I think. But after Easter, we're going to test out doing Wired Word again, which is we've got a curriculum, which is gets mailed out every week, where it kind of focuses on current events, and then a lot of it is politics and those sorts of things, and then how to match that with our Christian faith. So we're going to do that for about 6 weeks after Easter. So we are looking for volunteers to help lead it. So you can talk to someone on the Faith Formation Committee, which is Sally, Bob, me. There's usually some other people here too, but okay. So a couple just observations first, right? Hello, everybody. The Nortons are on the Faith Formation Committee too.
Sorry, we got very lost.
That's okay.
But it was good. Yeah.
Good. So if you recall, the other day we talked about the fig tree, right? And there was a sandwich. Jesus comes by and curses the fig tree, goes in and cleanses the temple, and then they walk by the next day and the fig tree is withered away. Well, Mark loves to do this, right? So if you look at the first part on Wednesday, you see this kind of same pattern, right? So we get into this, and it says, it was the days before the Passover and the festival of the unleavened bread. The chief priests and the scribes were looking for a way to arrest Jesus by stealth. Why? They don't want to do it during the festival, because there will be a riot among the people. So what do they need? They need some way to catch Jesus. What they really need is a traitor. They need an insider who's going to give them a way in, right? And then we get this story of Jesus being anointed, right? And we'll unpack all that. And then again, we get the other side of the sandwich, right? Judas, the traitor, is revealed, right? So Mark likes to tell his stories this way, right? So these things they're kind of interrelated. The same thing actually happens with the whole end of Mark. If we go from Mark 14 to the end of chapter 16, right? What happens here in this first part of chapter 14? We get a woman who wants to anoint Jesus' body. What happens at the very end of the gospel? The women go to the tomb to anoint Jesus' body, right? This actually is a good way to see that that's a whole chunk. Mark likes to do this. Yep.
Well, I think one of the mentions too about the spiritual gifts.
So if you recall, the other side of the sandwich, right? So Jesus being anointed, right? And then we get the other side of the sandwich, right?
How do we sign up to get a letter?
Right? That's good. So this is, I just want to point that out, that he's oftentimes telling his stories this way. This is how he writes, right? I want to make another observation. We're going to do a couple of these things, right? And if we had the time, the way I would have us do this is I'd have us really slowly read this passage and observe what we notice. And I'd ask you to do it the best that you can without kind of falling into the pious ways that we tend to read a scripture. Like if you had never read this before, you didn't know anything about it, the best that we could, if you would read it and say, what's going on here, right? I hope you would pick up that these are some of the things happening, right? What do we get? We get a backroom deal here. We got to kill this guy. We get intrigue, betrayal, judicial manipulation. Basically, we have a show trial, prisoner swaps, torture. Finally, someone gets executed. It's like a really good spy novel. Make a really good TV show, right? It's a political drama, right? With all of these things happening, right? Again, I've pointed this out to you before, right? Above the cross, what does it say? Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. That's his crime. That's why they're killing him, right? And again, why? Because he's claiming to be king over and against the Roman Caesar, right? So, if we pay attention to those things, right, I think it would help us get out of this idea that, right, this is kind of this pious, only a spiritual thing, right? Yes, Jesus wants to save us from a sin and death, but a sin and death are things that are going on right now, right? Think about what Jesus does throughout his ministry. Who does he tend to focus on? The poor, the sick, sinners too, but he goes and actually helps people with their concrete needs right now. That's a sin he wants to save them from. Yes, he also wants us to give us eternal life, but that's not in contrast with what we're doing right now, right? Eternal life is a continuance of this life, not a new thing, right? And he wants us to love God and love our neighbors, right? And I think we shy away from that kind of real world part of it. I think there's a couple of reasons. One is, for most of church history, the powers that be, whether it's the church authorities or the authorities of the state in a so-called Christian nation, whether it's the Roman Empire after Constantine, or whether it's France, Germany, England, America, right? The authorities don't want us to focus on this worldly things either, because it takes away from their power. And I think we get so frustrated that things are so awful in the world that we're in. We've got the same problems that Jesus had, that it's helpful to sort of escape from it and focus on, it's all about the next life, right? But it's very much a this worldly thing. It's also a next life thing, but they're connected, right? So yeah, and then. Yeah, and so it's not, it isn't an either or, it's both, and they're intimately tied, right? So let's look at what kind of happens in a few of these things. The other thing I think is worth pointing out is they're trying to kill Jesus. Right, so the government is after him, both the sort of temple authorities and the Roman authorities. What would a person do if the authorities are after them? They'd go into hiding, right? So notice what happens, right? We're going to get to this scene where Jesus is at the home of Simon the leper, but he's in a poor person's house. The authorities might not think to go there, right? What do they do when they're going to celebrate the Passover meal? So if you look at verse 12, right under Maundy Thursday, right? So they want to celebrate the Passover. The disciples ask him, where do you want us to go to prepare for this? He sends two of them, tells him to go into the city. You'll see a man carrying a jug of water, or a jar of water. Now this might not seem strange to us, but that's women's work. For a man to be carrying a jar of water is a bit usual. Right, that's what the woman in the household does. So it's like an odd thing, right? I mean, this is like the spy movie of we're going to meet the person you need to contact, and he'll be wearing an orange shirt or something, right? I mean, there's something weird happening. Yeah.
I always thought, how would they know which guy with which jar?
Yeah, right.
I never.
Yeah, so that's why it's odd even for there to be a guy carrying the woman. So in Jesus' context, that's what women do. Like the women in the household, they go get the water from the well and carry it back home with a jar on their head, right? And then once you see this guy, you go into the house, he goes in, and you say to the owner of the house, the teacher asks, where is my guest room, or I'm going to eat the Passover with my disciples? We've got a password. Right? This is how we're going to figure out which one it is. Right? He'll show you a room upstairs, furnished and ready, right? So that he sends them into the city, and they find everything like this. When it was evening, he came with the 12. So he doesn't enter the city until it's dark out. Got a hood on, probably, right? I mean, so this is all like, he's a fugitive. He's hiding out, right? By the way, this explains why Peter betrays him. At least in part, right? Peter's hiding too. So this is kind of getting ahead, but like we get that betrayal scene at the end, right, where at the very end of this story, right, Peter's out there hanging out outside Caiaphas' house where the trial has happened, and 3 times someone says, weren't you with him? He says, no, every time. Well, he doesn't want to get arrested either, right? And in fact, there's this whole scene, there's a similar scene in a movie that's a very violent movie. I'm not going to recommend you go watch it, but if you have seen the movie, that's a Quentin Tarantino movie, Inglourious Bastards is the name of the film. And in the film, there's a British guy who's trying to infiltrate a Nazi Germany. He's got a really very good German, but his accent's a little bit off. And he has to tell them, well, actually, I grew up in this village and all of these things. And they believe him, but they're in a bar. And he orders drinks for everybody. And he goes like this. I want 3 glasses. Well, in Germany and pretty much any continental Western European country, you do it like this. Only British and Americans go like this. So it gives it away, right? That's what's happening here with Peter, right? His accent's giving him away, right?
Where did you learn that?
Well, but that's why that film works, right? I mean, you have to know that that's how they do it, right? But I mean, so there's these kinds. I mean, this is actually written like a really good spy story, right? There's betrayal and intrigue and hiding, and there's fugitives, and right. Yeah, go ahead, Bob. What's that?
This was first.
Well, this was first, right?
Well, it's interesting you present it that way because I don't know who explained it to me this way, but if he was sent to a neighborhood,
yeah,
and he's supposed to look specifically for a guy carrying water,
yeah,
it would have been, if the man was carrying water, it would have been into a building that would have been like an all-male hostel or hotel,
well, possibly,
or
yeah,
something like that. So the guy carrying the water is signifying, which building to go into, where the guests would have been all men.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there could be something like that going on, but again, there's a sign, right? And what's not clear, I mean, is if Jesus has planned this all out ahead of time, or if he could do this because he's also divine, like he's got it arranged that way, right? Is it him going into a city earlier and making plans, or is he just says, I'll make this happen, right? But this is the way the story is written, right? If it's only us who think this is this pious story, and we start thinking about how we're going to observe it in a church, right? That we don't catch these details, right? But this is intrigue, and right, it's people are hiding, right? They're fugitives, right? There's this weird verse 53 on the back of the page, right? I think only Mark has this, but a certain young man was following them wearing nothing but a linen cloth. They caught hold of him, but he like wiggles out of it. He leaves it behind. He runs off naked, right? Again, this is about people running and trying to hide, but there's a symbolism in here too of, right, this is, I mean, what happens? All of Jesus' disciples abandon him. And they should be ashamed of this. So this guy's running off naked, right? It's actually representing a shame.
One book that we had done said that this guy might have been Mark.
Well, that's possible too, right? It's never meant, right, yeah.
But maybe nobody else knew it happened.
Yeah. But I think Mark is using this to show that the disciples should be ashamed. So, I mean, it's like you're running off naked. You've abandoned everything, right?
Didn't that happen in Gethsemane?
Well, yeah, that's where this is happening. It's happening in Gethsemane. By the way, I mean, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but where does linen cloth show up again?
At the tomb.
At the tomb.
Right.
And who's in the tomb? Jesus and
The angel.
who's called? A young man. So that's symbolizing the redemption of the disciples, right? The linen cloth is there. The young man is there. This time he's dazzling white, which goes back to the transfiguration. And it's actually symbolizing that the apostles have been redeemed because they've come back, right? So they all fail, but they're all restored for the most part too, right? I mean, this is what he's doing.
God is wonderful at dramatist.
Right? I mean, it's pretty good stuff, right?
I mean, is that something one learns in seminary or deep reading or what? I'm not.
I mean, I'm not making this up. I've got commentaries that tell me this, right? Yeah, I'm not the first person to do this, right? Yeah.
I mean that.
But I mean, think about. I mean, part of this is right. It is this sort of deep reading and careful reading and reading with a knowledge of the context, right? It's also like, I mean, think about a pastor trying to preach this on Easter morning or Maundy Thursday or whatever, right? You only got so much time. And again, we tend to focus on the sort of spiritual aspects of it rather than what's actually happening in Jesus' world. How might we apply that to our world, right? Yeah.
So in relationship to that, do you read like journal articles? I mean, these sort of insights that you have,
Yeah.
it strikes me that that's partly because you stay up on the literature, and we have all these scholars around
that's part of it.
The world who are studying passages and think, oh, look at this, I'm going to publish this about the significance of the young man in the tomb wearing linen.
Right.
I can imagine an article.
Yeah, I mean, there are journal articles like that, and then they get incorporated into commentaries, right? So I mean, you read I mean, that's a bit of an aside, but like there's like Erdman's in Grand Rapids, or Baker Books in Grand Rapids are big Christian publishers, right? And they have commentary series where like we're going to create a series and we're going to get top-notch scholars to write a commentary on each of these biblical books. It's something like Mark. I mean, it takes the person 8 to 10 years to write the book.
I think Mark even says that he feels, I guess, that if Judas had gone to ask for redemption, he might have been forgiven too.
Right.
Just like the other disciples, but he doesn't.
But Judas doesn't ask to be redeemed, right? I mean, even there, like, if we look, I'm getting out of order, but that's perfectly fine. Where is it? So when they celebrate the Lord's Supper, this is right under where it says Maundy Thursday, right? When it was evening, he came with the 12. They went to take their places and were eating. Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." They began to be distressed and to say to him one after another, "Surely not I." He said to them, "It is one of the 12, one who is dipping the bread in the bowl. Go with me." Does it ever tell us who it is?
Where was Judas?
Well, but I mean, so one of the other Gospels, it's either Matthew or Luke, I think, does actually have Judas put his hand into the bowl, sitting next to Jesus, but not here. Mark actually thinks it's all of them.
It's,
Oh.
yeah. It's not just one, that's all.
I mean, Judas betrays him by going and turning him over to the authorities, but Peter betrays him. All of them run away. Nobody stays with him. I mean, if we think about homework as a whole, from chapter 14 on, everybody abandons Jesus, right? What does Jesus even say on the cross? My God, why have you abandoned me? Right, so at least he perceives even God has abandoned him. He dies totally alone. Now, of course, God hasn't abandoned him. He just feels like God has abandoned him. And then it's a story of everybody comes back. Right? Actually, there are some people who don't abandon him. It's the women. The women don't abandon him, right? Which is, well, we're going to come back to that. It's also some symbolism happening there, right? But I mean,
But listen in the service, the last hymn
okay,
was really talked.
okay, but that's kind of what happens, right? So they're going to celebrate the Passover. So it's whatever. It's like 33 A.D., right? They're celebrating the Passover. The Romans conquered Israel in 63 B.C. So for 90 years or so now, the Romans have ruled, right? The Romans by this time have learned Passover is a dangerous time. Because what does Passover celebrate? The Exodus from Egypt. I mean, it's the 4th of July. It's a festival for celebrating your freedom. But they're not free. So again, imagine if America gets conquered by some foreign power and we spend some time under a foreign authority. What do you think would happen on the 4th of July? There'd be protests every year. There'd be violence, and right, people would be trying to overthrow. Like that's what they were doing too. Right, I mean, that's the idea, right? Is that so the Romans are well prepared for this, right? So the authorities are always on high alert during Passover, right? Well, Jesus is intentionally antagonistic. I mean, Palm Sunday, he rides in on a donkey, fulfilling all of these prophecies, right? The people are like putting down their clothing and saying he's king, right? He's intentionally appealing to the Passover themes is a challenge to Rome's authority. He cleanses the temple, right? He takes over, right? So he's intentionally being antagonistic, right? And again, we tend to focus on he's fulfilling these Old Testament prophecies about salvation. He is, but if you go read the context of all those Old Testament prophecies, it's all in this context of liberation from Babylon or Assyria. That God's going to come free us again. So it's both this worldly thing and a next worldly thing, always. Yes, he's going to save us from our sins so we go to heaven, but it's also, he's going to save you from poverty and oppression and these things right now.
And they still thought of him as a king.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely how they're talking about him. I mean, they're saying, here comes the king, right? And again, why is he killed? His crime is Jesus of Nazareth, king of the Jews, right? By the way, Pilate's antagonistic too. I don't think we get this in Mark, but it's in one of the other Gospels. The Jewish authorities say, can you change the sign to say, he claimed to be the king of the Jews? And Pilate says, no, what I've written, I have written. Well, why? Because Pilate wants to spit in their face. You guys keep trying to rebel. We're going to kill every one of you people. Right?
He was in a hot place.
Oh, but Pilate's a bad person. Like he kind of comes. I mean, again, what's happened historically is we've kind of given Pilate a break, and we blame the Jews, right? But who actually kills him? The Roman authorities, right? Pilate's he. I mean, earlier on, Pilate actually kills a bunch of Jewish worshippers and has their blood mixed with the temple sacrifices. I mean, he hates the Jews. He's just a bad dictator, right? There's nothing redeemable about him at all, right?
Wasn't he put in that position because he married?
Yeah, he does. He basically gets himself into trouble with the Caesar and gets exiled to Palestine.
Right.
He doesn't want to be there anyway. right? So I mean, this is just full of political intrigue, right? So this is the context of all of this, right? So I want to focus on one thing here. There's a passage on Wednesday that always gets sort of misunderstood. So Jesus is at the home of Simon the leper. He's at a table. This woman comes and puts very costly perfume on him, basically, anoints him, right? So he's in the home of a leper. Here's Jesus hanging out with the least of these to the very end, right? This woman pays, puts all this perfume on him. We're told it's very costly. One of the other Gospels, I think, actually tells us it's worth 300 denarii. A denarii is what is the daily wage of a day laborer. So this is a year's salary of a day laborer. So we're talking in our currency somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000. And so when these people sort of say, hey, why are you doing this? We could have given this to the poor. They've got a point. Like, this seems like a waste. We're going to take a $30,000 bottle of perfume and pour the whole thing on his head? Come on. We could use this better. Just put a couple of drops on there and we'll sell the rest, right? They have a point, right? And Jesus says, leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has performed a service for me. And then here's the verse that everybody kind of uses in strange ways. For you always have the poor with you, and you can show kindness to them whenever you wish, but you will not always have me. So this seems quite inconsistent with Jesus' usual attitude. Usually he's going and always helping the poor. Now all of a sudden he says, no, let's use this $30,000 bottle of perfume. Right? There's always going to be poor people. Who cares? Right? For one thing, he's quoting the Old Testament. If you turn the handout over on the very bottom of the back page, Deuteronomy 15:11. Actually, we should read a bigger chunk, but I only had room for this verse. But he says, since there could never cease to be some in need on the earth, I therefore command you, open your hand to the poor and your needy neighbor in the land. So he's just quoting the Old Testament. The Old Testament says, you'll always have the poor. You're obligated to help them. What he's
that in the middle.
Yeah, right. Yeah. What he's saying here is the poor will always be here. You are always obligated to help them, but I won't always be here. Right? I'm going to go away. You're not going to have this opportunity again, right? He also interprets it as his being anointed for his burial, right? So he's saying, you're not going to get a chance to do this when I die, because I'm going to get arrested and tortured and executed. So here you actually get to anoint me, right? What's going to happen after this? So what's the next section? The upper room, the Last Supper. What does he say? This is my body given for you. I mean, there's all this body reference about his body, right? So he isn't saying don't help the poor, right? In fact, one of the reasons why the disciples are so upset is part of observing the Passover was giving alms to the poor. So they're like, here's our opportunity to fulfill that obligation, and you've taken it away from us, and rather you've wasted this perfume, right? Go ahead. Yeah. Right, and so who else does that? Who else gives what they have? The widow who gives it. So we actually have something important happening. We have the woman who's poor, who gives all that she has, the two Hamites. Here we have a wealthy woman who's giving all that she has, a year's salary's worth of something as a gift, right? She gives it to the temple, the poor woman earlier. Jesus has said the temple's going to be destroyed. In 3 days I'll raise up a new one, his own body. This woman is giving it to that, right? I mean, there's all this symbolism, right? But it's also saying we've got a poor person who gives everything they have to Jesus. We have a rich person who gives everything they have to Jesus, right? What's everybody else doing? They're complaining, so in the widow's Hamite story, Jesus says, all these other people come and give from from what they have extra. They're not giving from what they actually need. She gives everything she has. We have this woman who gives everything that she has. A wealthy woman, right? And she could be a prostitute. Luke tells a version of this, a story, but in his it's Mary Magdalene.
Once again, it's the women.
Right. Yeah. But so, and then we're going to come back to this. But this is part of what's happening. Whereas all the other people who are typically men and authorities, they don't give all that they have. In fact, as soon as things get rough here, when the authorities come out to arrest Jesus and all his followers, they jump. They do what they have to do to save their own skin. Right? The overall thing Mark is doing is telling us how to be good disciples. That's what the book is about. How to follow Jesus.
Many of the studies we are just completed, you're always striving to be a disciple. One of the people in the group said, the disciples weren't all good.
Right. And I think what's really powerful here, right? I mean, again, we get there. They all fall away. The people who do follow him, it's only these two women. There's some other women earlier in the gospel, right? They're all pretty much anonymous, right? And one of the reasons for that is I think these things really happen, for one, but they're also standing in as the model for discipleship. And Jesus seems to be teaching that the discipleship is a feminine trait. It's about a service and following, right? So I mean, I think we want to be careful here. I mean, they definitely have gender norms that aren't ours. But they're using their cultural gender norms to say a disciple is like a woman who serves, who follows after, who listens to their master, right? I mean, think of the whole idea. The other image Jesus often uses of a church as the bride of Christ. And that's the imagery. So, I mean, to be a disciple is to be a woman and have these sort of feminine traits, right? But everybody's supposed to do that, male and female. That's what's happening. So yes, it's history and real things happening, but it's also a symbolism that people at this time would have understood that we have to have explained to us, right? That's again what's happening with these anonymous women. Yep.
Matt, thank you for what you're saying, but you're faithful to the lens of the Gospel of Mark, not Matthew or Luke or John. And it comes up, there's no resurrection in the Gospel of Mark.
Right.
The post-narrative, if we continue in that, is quite different than looking at the disciples.
Well, so I want to. There's a couple ways to sort of think about that, right? I mean, so it's one of the things that's really obvious here. I mean, again, if you have a Bible with you, or especially if you have a good study Bible, when you get to Mark 16, verse 8, it'll tell you all the best manuscripts end here. And it ends with the women going to the empty tomb, seeing the angel in the tomb, and they're afraid and don't tell anyone. It actually ends amid a sentence, right? It ends in a way that's incomplete. There's actually a whole bunch of scholars who actually think that the real first gospel ended with chapter 13. It ends with them with this whole apocalyptic saying, "Stay awake," right? And again, if it's about the discipleship, that makes sense, right? Chapters 14 through 16, personally, I do think they were part of the first gospel, but they're liturgical in a certain sense. They're like stations of the cross, because what he's got, like he demarcates every day. You could actually go to Jerusalem and walk this, which is probably what they were doing in the very early church. What were they doing on Holy Week? They were actually going to all of these sites and observing it, and that's how they're actually teaching the gospel, right? I also think that they presume there's a physical resurrection, so it doesn't need to be part of the story. I mean, they think it's there, right? And so I mean that's how they've been taught it, and now we want the back story, how we got there. Matthew, Luke, and John include it because they're written at a later date and people don't know. They have to actually be told this right? I think one of the real powerful things about the Gospel of Mark is it appears to have written in Rome, somewhere between a 65 and a 70 AD. And we're told elsewhere in the Bible that John Mark, who's the person who supposedly wrote this, is one of Peter's followers. So this is Peter's Gospel. So imagine reading this, and you read all these bad things about Peter, and Peter's sitting a couple rows down the pew, or he's the one up in the pulpit. Right? I mean, I think that's actually the power of it, of he's saying, look, I failed him. But we were redeemed, right? And I think as that first generation dies, you then have to expand the gospel, and you have to tell them what happened with the resurrection, right? But they don't need to do it right away, because I think originally you would read this, or you'd probably hear it read, and you'd get to the ending and says, and they were afraid and didn't tell anyone. And if you think about it for 15 seconds, you go, well, then how do we know about it? Eventually they did tell someone, right? But they don't do it right away because they're so freaked out. There was a hand somewhere.
Well, that ending, that abrupt ending, if we say that is the ending, and the stuff that's added afterwards is just some other stuff that's put in. But if that abrupt ending, it seems to me, we've been talking about how Mark sandwiches things. It seems like that's a bookend to the beginning of Mark,
I do.
Where we don't get a nativity,
nope.
Any of that. All of a sudden, John the Baptist appears.
Yep.
And so it's as though we have almost not a divine entry into this story or a divine exit from the story. It is a man who is the God-man doing godlike things, but he's a man in some ways.
No, and that's exactly what's, I think, happening. One other thing, we could talk about lots of things. Look at the Passover scene. So the middle paragraph there. We'll read it for a second, and then tell me what's missing from what you usually think should be there. Right? They have the meal. Jesus talks about them being betrayed. Actually, it's the bottom paragraph. While they were eating, he took a loaf of bread. A blessing it, he gave it to them and said, take this, my body. Then he took the cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, and all of them drank from it. He said to them, this is the blood of my covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I will tell you, can never drink again from the fruit of the vine until the day I have drank it anew in the kingdom of God. So almost every time you've ever seen the Lord's Supper celebrated, or if you read it in any of the other Gospels, there's an important line missing. Do this in remembrance of me. Where does the remembrance occur? It's up above. Verse 8. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for its burial. Truly I tell you, wherever the good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of me. So it's actually the emphasis on what does it mean to be a good disciple.
Be like her.
Be like her, right? The emphasis is on how do you follow me, right? So that's where that's where Mark puts the remembrance of, remember what she did. You do that too.
They don't sound hard to
They don't sound hard, right? You know. Yeah, it is. It's very Jewish. Right, and again, this doesn't mean that the other Gospels aren't true, right? But it's just we have to realize that yes, they're narrating history at the same time as they're filling all of this with some symbolic meaning, right? And we don't do this as much anymore, right? Actually, good literature does often. Like, it will tell a story, but then things are being symbolized. Right? And Mark has been historically discredited as just a boring book. A story is incomplete. When you read it in Greek, it's bad Greek. It's clearly not his first language, right? In the early church, Matthew gets all the attention, or John. And Mark was actually read as an abbreviation of Matthew. It's the quick version for the uneducated, which is why it gets put a second, even though it's earlier, right?
Matthew's just filled with
And actually, it's the opposite around. Like, Matthew has filled out the story to give us more details and explain it to us. It's almost a commentary on Mark, right? Where Mark is a brilliant book once you figure out what's happening. I mean, there's symbolism and there's all these patterns, and it's just, you have to read it 25 times to figure out what's going on, right? Anyway, I think that's enough for today.
What you said, that it's suspenseful,
Yeah.
everything, especially when he
Yeah.
says, he's talking to the disciples, and he's saying it's one of the 12, one who is dipping the bread into the bowl with
Yeah.
I mean, exactly.
And we know it's Judas. We know it's Judas in a sense. Well, but I mean, he does tell us above that Judas goes and betrays him, right?
But when he's talking to the 12,
Exactly.
there's this
And they're all like, "Is it me? Is it me?" And he's like, "Yep, it's you." Yeah.
Symbolism of the women.
Well, so what's happening with the women is we're actually, everybody who wants to follow Jesus is being told, again, to their cultural norms,